They say blood is thicker than water. Forgetting blood is exactly what leeches drain. Standing in that Seattle courtroom, my sister smirked and told me to pay up or step aside, thinking I was still her obedient punching bag from 20 years ago. She had no idea that modern weapons of mass destruction are forged from metadata. And I just walked into her trial carrying a digital nuclear arsenal. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Haley James. I am 34 years old, and I sat completely alone at the heavy mahogany table assigned to the defense. Outside the tall, arched windows of the Seattle Family Court, the sky was a suffocating shade of wet concrete. It was pouring a relentless and miserable rain that washed down the thick glass, forming a bleak gray backdrop to the circus unfolding inside the room. The courtroom smelled faintly of damp wool coats, aged wood, and the distinct sour scent of manufactured desperation. The atmosphere was stifling, heavy with the weight of impending legal judgments and the oppressive presence of the people sitting just a few feet across the aisle. I did not fidget. I did not look down at my hands. I simply sat there, a solitary island of absolute stillness, in a room vibrating with theatrical hostility. At the plaintiff's table stood my sister Chloe. She was 36 years old, though she had spent the better part of the morning trying to style herself to look like a fragile, overwhelmed victim of circumstance. She wore a modest, slightly oversized beige cardigan and had strategically pinned her hair back to appear rushed and exhausted. But I knew her better than anyone else on this planet. I could see the subtle, triumphant gleam in her eyes, the slight arrogant tilt of her chin. She was flanked by a slick, expensive family lawyer who looked like he billed by the minute, standing there like a knight defending a maiden in distress. Chloe was playing the role of the miserable, destitute single mother to absolute perfection, yet the predatory glint in her pupils betrayed the truth. She thought she had won. She thought she had me completely cornered. The courtroom fell dead silent when she delivered her rehearsed line. She turned her head just slightly, making sure the judge and the gallery could see the fabricated pain etched on her face. But her eyes locked directly onto mine. "Pay up or step aside so someone else can raise your nephew." Chloe spat out, her voice trembling with a perfectly calibrated mix of righteous anger and deep sorrow. It was a brilliant, sickening performance. It painted her as the selfless protector, and me as the wealthy, heartless villain. She threw the words like a physical weapon across the quiet room, expecting me to flinch, expecting me to rise to the bait and cause a scene. Right behind her, occupying the first row of the gallery, sat our parents. They were the ultimate supporting cast in Chloe's grand delusion. The moment Chloe delivered her line, my mother let out a loud, pathetic sob, dabbing at her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. My father patted her shoulder, shaking his head in exaggerated disgust. They began muttering just loud enough for the court reporter to catch the vibrations, intentionally hurling accusations into the heavy air. "She is so incredibly cold-blooded," my mother stage whispered to the empty room. "She makes a massive income, 6 figures easily, and she is just abandoning her own flesh and blood without a second thought." My father nodded vigorously, glaring daggers at the back of my head. They were using my nephew, a perfectly healthy, incredibly well-cared-for baby, who was probably fast asleep in a premium luxury daycare right at this exact moment, as nothing more than a human shield. They paraded his existence as a tool for emotional blackmail, weaponizing the concept of family to extract a massive financial payout. Up on the high bench, the presiding judge rubbed his temples. He was an older man, his face lined with the deep exhaustion of dealing with endless domestic squabbles day in and day out. He looked down at me with tired, heavily prejudiced eyes. He had already read their fabricated legal filings, already digested the tragic narrative they had spoon-fed the court clerks. He leaned into his microphone, his voice echoing loudly off the wood-paneled walls. "Miss James, The judge began, his tone thick with impatience and underlying judgment. Are you standing before this court today, intending to deny the financial guarantee agreement that your family is alleging you signed? The plaintiffs have presented what they claim is proof of your financial obligations. What exactly is your stance on this matter? He waited for an emotional outburst. My parents waited for tears and an apology. Chloe waited for me to raise a white flag and offer a settlement. They all fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I am the director of data compliance at Aegis Data Solutions, one of the premier cybersecurity corporations on the West Coast. My entire professional existence, my daily breathing involves analyzing massive, chaotic sets of information and identifying critical threats. I spend my life hunting down malicious actors, isolating corrupt files, and eliminating system infections before they can destroy a secure network. Looking at the three of them, Chloe, my mother, and my father, I felt absolutely no familial warmth, no tug of shared genetics, no emotional damage. I looked at them and saw nothing but severe security vulnerabilities. They were simply bad code attempting to breach my personal firewall. They were a sophisticated phishing scam sitting in my inbox disguised as a legitimate family unit. I maintained a terrifyingly calm demeanor. I did not cross my arms defensively. I did not open my mouth to argue, scream, or defend myself against the barrage of insults my parents were still actively whispering behind me. My silence was absolute, a frozen layer of ice covering a highly active calculating system. The slick lawyer representing Chloe shifted uncomfortably on his feet. My parents' fake sobbing faltered for a fraction of a second, thrown off by my lack of engagement. Even the judge frowned deeply, clearly unnerved by my complete and total lack of emotional reaction. They had anticipated a screaming match, a desperate plea for mercy, or a hasty financial settlement to avoid public shame. Instead, they got a human black hole. I let the silence stretch out, letting the stifling tension fill every single corner of the room. I was perfectly content to let them revel in their smug manufactured victory for just a few more minutes. Because while they were busy playing to the gallery with their cheap emotional theatrics, they were completely oblivious to the fact that I held a digital guillotine in my encrypted briefcase and the blade was already in motion. To understand how I became this unfeeling machine, you have to rewind the tape. Growing up in our suburban house, the dynamic was programmed into the mainframe early on. Chloe was the golden child, the one born to sparkle in front of an audience. She craved the spotlight like oxygen, convinced her absolute destiny was to be a massive social media influencer. I, on the other hand, was the designated workhorse. I was the invisible background process running silently to keep her operating system from crashing. Let me give you the core memory, the genesis of my digital fortress. When I was 18 years old, I bought a beat-up second-hand sedan. I paid for it using every single penny I had meticulously saved from working grueling graveyard shifts at a local diner. It was mine, a symbol of pure independence. Less than 2 weeks after I bought it, Chloe threw a massive tantrum about needing a ride to a cosmetic brand casting call downtown. She took my keys off the kitchen counter without asking. 3 hours later, she wrapped my car around a concrete parking pillar. She was entirely physically unharmed, but the vehicle was completely totaled. When the tow truck dropped off the mangled metal in our driveway, I expected basic justice. Instead, my parents cornered me in the narrow hallway. My mother stroking Chloe's hair as my sister fake cried at the breakfast table delivered the absolute verdict. Haley, you have to pay the insurance deductible and the remaining loan balance, she said, her voice dripping with toxic empathy for the wrong daughter. Your sister is suffering from severe emotional trauma from the accident. You have to yield to her right now. You need to be the bigger person. I stared at them, the profound injustice burning a hole straight through my chest. I had to empty out my entire bank account to pay thousands of dollars for a wreck I did not cause, just so the golden child could recover from the mild stress of destroying my hard-earned property. That was the exact moment the very first line of code for my emotional firewall was written. After that pivotal day, the paths we took diverged completely. Chloe dropped out of university during her freshman year. She loudly claimed higher education was a corporate scam that stifled her creative genius. She insisted she needed to focus 100% of her energy on curating a flawless aesthetic for her followers. Her days consisted of posing in least luxury clothing, taking endless pictures, and drinking $15 iced lattes. Meanwhile, I enrolled in a notoriously rigorous cybersecurity degree program. I worked 3 separate jobs to afford the crippling tuition. I served bitter coffee at dawn, tutored failing computer science students at noon, and monitored remote server logs at midnight. I survived on a maximum of 4 hours of sleep a night and cheap instant noodles. But my parents were not satisfied with just draining my youth. They actively came for my emergency funds. Every single time Chloe's influencer career hit a snag, which was a constant occurrence, my parents would demand a financial bailout. She needs to go to a music festival in California. Haley, it is absolutely vital for her brand networking. My father would insist, standing blocking the doorway of my cramped dorm room. We are incredibly short on cash this month. Transfer $500 to her account immediately. It is an investment in the family's future. If I resisted their intense guilt-tripping protocols initiated, I was labeled selfish. I was called unsupportive and jealous. They would raid whatever small savings I had managed to scrape together, treating my checking account like an unlimited debit card assigned exclusively to the Chloe James Relief Fund. They did not care if I had to walk 5 miles in the freezing rain because I could not afford a basic bus ticket. All that mattered in their warped reality was that Chloe's digital feed looked wealthy, vibrant, and carefree. The sheer suffocating scale of their parasitism finally forced a critical system update in my brain. I sat down one night staring blankly at a bank statement that literally read $0 and finally processed the brutal, unvarnished truth. I was not a daughter to them. I was never a daughter to them. I was a living life insurance policy, a financial failsafe specifically designed to catch Chloe every single time she jumped blindly off a cliff. My sole purpose in their eyes was to be the backup generator when her glamorous fake facade lost power. You cannot reason with aggressive malware. You can only isolate it. So I initiated a hard reset. The day I graduated with top honors, I secured a highly coveted, high-paying entry-level job in the corporate tech sector. I did not invite my family to the graduation ceremony. Instead, I packed my few miserable belongings into 2 cardboard boxes, changed my phone number, and moved to an unlisted apartment across the city. I blocked their email addresses, their social media profiles, and routed any physical mail straight to the incinerator. I severed the network connection completely. I built an impenetrable firewall around my life, my finances, and my fragile emotions. I stopped being the family doormat and became the ruthless architect of my own security. I cut them off entirely to save my own life. My firewall was strong, but I made one critical error in my mid-20s. I let a Trojan horse pass the gates. His name was Marcus. We were married for exactly 3 years. Marcus was the absolute epitome of the Silicon Valley wannabe tech bro. He wore $200 plain gray t-shirts, drank imported artisanal kombucha, and constantly pitched disruptive software applications that fundamentally solved 0 real-world problems. He was a charismatic visionary, or so he enthusiastically claimed to anyone who would listen, but the reality was, he possessed the financial management skills of a blindfolded gambler. His startup, a painfully useless application meant to gamify daily hydration, was burning through seed funding at a terrifying rate. While he was out giving arrogant speeches at local co-working spaces, I was the one pulling all-nighters auditing his chaotic ledgers and quietly fixing his broken back-end code so his fragile company would not face immediate corporate bankruptcy. I was his invisible safety net, just like I had been for my entirely toxic family. The critical vulnerability in our marriage did not come from a random stranger at a bar. It came from the exact malware I had tried so desperately to permanently delete from my life. Chloe somehow wormed her way back into my protected orbit through him. It started under the innocent guise of needing high-level technical consulting for her rapidly failing lifestyle brand. She desperately needed Marcus to help optimize her video streaming setup, she claimed. Suddenly, she was constantly hanging around our loft, laughing a little too loudly at his terrible derivative tech jokes. My parents, who had miraculously bypassed my block list by routing their communication through Marcus, actively encouraged this blatant overstepping. "They are such a beautiful pair," my mother loudly proclaimed over the phone one evening when Marcus stupidly put her on speaker. "They operate on the exact same creative frequency. It is so wonderful that Marcus is finally getting to collaborate with a true visionary." They were openly shipping my husband and my sister, right in front of my face. Most normal people discover infidelity through a stray perfume scent on a collar, a tearful drunken confession, or a late-night text message carelessly left on an unlocked screen. Not me. My professional instincts do not sleep, and networks do not lie. The betrayal triggered an automated system alert. I was running routine network maintenance on our home server one Tuesday night when a bright red notification popped up on my secondary monitor. It was a cloud data synchronization error. Marcus had carelessly linked a specific deeply hidden shared folder on his primary workstation to a brand new unrecognized mobile device. I seamlessly bypassed his pathetic password protection and traced the IP address and the MAC address. It belonged to a brand new smartphone registered directly to Chloe. I dug into the root directory. It was not filled with streaming optimization scripts or marketing plans. It was hundreds of megabytes of highly explicit geotagged photographs and time-stamped calendar invitations for expensive hotel rooms booked under his corporate credit card. The metadata told a completely undeniable, mathematically proven story. They had been sleeping together for 6 entire months. A normal woman would have screamed until her throat bled. A normal woman would have thrown expensive plates against the wall, demanded answers, and called her mother crying. I did absolutely none of those things. You do not argue with a deeply embedded virus. You quarantine it, strip it of its permissions, and violently purge it from your hard drive. I spent the next 48 hours executing a flawless financial extraction protocol. I quietly initiated emergency wire transfers, moving exactly 50% of our shared liquid assets into a secure encrypted account he did not even know existed. I legally removed my name from the apartment lease, the utility bills, and his failing startup's board of directors. On a Thursday evening, while he was in the shower washing off whatever pathetic lies he had told me that day, I packed my minimal belongings. I left a neatly printed stack of the server logs and a fully drafted, legally binding divorce petition sitting right on his ergonomic keyboard. I walked out into the freezing night and never looked back. The divorce went through completely uncontested. He was far too terrified of me leaking the data logs to his conservative angel investors to fight me on a single dime. Less than 4 months later, Marcus and Chloe made their nauseating relationship public on their social media channels. My parents actually threw them a lavish engagement party. I heard through mutual, highly gossipy acquaintances that my father stood up and gave a tearful toast declaring that Marcus had finally found the right woman who knew how to truly inspire his entrepreneurial genius. They openly celebrated the betrayal. It was the final definitive confirmation I ever needed. I scrubbed them entirely from my timeline. I channeled every ounce of my energy into Aegis Data Solutions. I climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless calculating efficiency, making Director of Data Compliance by the time I was 32 years old. I bought a stunning minimalist penthouse that overlooked the dark, churning waters of Seattle Bay. For 2 incredibly peaceful, completely silent years, my life was a beautifully structured, bug-free program. I was totally untouchable. Until the lawsuit arrived in my mailbox. The pristine silence of my penthouse was shattered on a Tuesday morning by a heavy knock on the reinforced steel door. A process server handed me a thick manila envelope. The house of cards had finally collapsed. I had known it was mathematically inevitable. Marcus possessed zero business acumen, and his hydration startup had spectacularly filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy right around the exact same time Chloe gave birth to their son. Simultaneously, the social media algorithm had fundamentally shifted, popping Chloe's pathetic influencer bubble. Brands stopped paying for her sponsored posts, and the free luxury trips completely dried up. They were broke, desperate, and suddenly responsible for a human life. And like clockwork, they turned their predatory gaze back toward their favorite human, ATM. I opened the envelope expecting a pathetic begging letter. Instead, I found a massive civil lawsuit. I was being sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The official legal claim was framed as necessary child support intervention and familial debt assumption. They were legally demanding that I pay off their enormous mountains of accumulated debt and fully fund my nephew's lifestyle, claiming I had explicitly promised to be their financial guarantor. I sat at my kitchen island pouring a cup of black coffee and clinically reviewed the attached exhibits. They had not just filed empty allegations, they had fabricated an incredibly sophisticated paper trail. Exhibit A was a heavily detailed loan guarantee contract, completely filled out, featuring a flawless electronic signature that perfectly matched my digital authorization stamp. Exhibit B was even more audacious. It was a digital audio file saved on a provided flash drive. When I plugged it into my heavily secured air-gapped laptop and pressed play, I heard my own exact voice. The voice recording clearly stated, "I promise to cover the outstanding balances and take full financial responsibility for the child's living expenses. You have my word." A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have hired a standard family law attorney who charges $300 an hour to sit in mediation and negotiate a settlement to make the nightmare go away. I am not a normal person. I did not hire a family mediator. I hired a former federal prosecutor who spent 15 years dismantling international white-collar cybercrime syndicates. We bypassed the entire emotional theater of family court and turned my dining room into a digital forensics laboratory. For 3 solid days, we ran a comprehensive, completely brutal audit on the discovery files Chloe's lawyers had so confidently submitted. They assumed I would be too intimidated by the legal jargon to actually look at the metadata. That was their fatal error. We started by isolating the financial ledgers attached to the alleged debt I was supposedly responsible for. They tried to bury the line items under generic categories labeled as essential childcare and household maintenance. But money leaves a very specific, undeniable digital footprint. I unleashed a proprietary data scraping algorithm on the banking spreadsheets they provided. Within 2 hours, the truth glowed bright green on my terminal. The hundreds of thousands of dollars in crushing debt had absolutely nothing to do with pediatric bills, baby formula, or cribs. It was a spectacular monument to financial fraud. Over 80% of the outstanding balances were categorized under luxury lifestyle maintenance. There were recurring monthly charges of $2,500 for a leased European sports utility vehicle. There were massive 5-figure credit card swipes at high-end Italian boutique stores for designer handbags. There was even a recurring retainer fee of $4,000 a month being paid to a boutique public relations agency tasked with artificially inflating Chloe's social media follower count. They were literally trying to legally force me to finance a fake lifestyle they could no longer afford. But the financial grift was just the appetizer. The main course was the technical execution of their fabricated evidence. I pulled up the metadata for the electronic signature on the guarantor contract. An e-signature is not just a picture of a name. It is a complex cryptographic hash bound to a specific IP address and timestamp. I ran the packet capture logs and traced the origin of the network request that executed the signature. It did not originate from my secure corporate server, nor did it come from my penthouse network. The geographic location pinged back to a residential broadband router. Specifically, it mapped exactly to the network coordinates of the luxury rental house Marcus and Chloe were currently being evicted from. Then I turned my attention to the audio file. The voice sounded exactly like mine, capturing my exact cadence and pitch. But human ears are easily deceived. Raw audio frequencies are not. I fed the file into an advanced acoustic analysis program designed to detect anomalies in sound waves. The software immediately flagged severe compression artifacts and unnatural spectral gaps. There was zero background room tone. I cross-referenced the audio wave patterns against my own public keynote speeches available online. The screen flashed red. It was a 100% match for synthetic generation. The recording was a deepfake. They had scraped hours of my corporate presentations from the internet, fed my voice into an artificial intelligence generation tool, and typed out a fake confession for the machine to read. They had committed outright verifiable digital forgery. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting off my retinas. They had escalated from toxic family manipulation to committing highly illegal federal-level wire fraud. They had confidently handed me the exact rope needed to permanently end their pathetic reign of terror. I looked at the forensic report printing out from my secure terminal and smiled a cold, completely hollow smile. It was time to go back to court. The rain continued to batter the tall glass windows of the Seattle courtroom, but inside the suffocating atmosphere had reached its absolute boiling point. We were exactly back where we started, but now the theatrical production was reaching its grand finale. Chloe's slick, highly paid attorney paced back and forth in front of the judge's bench, delivering a closing argument so drenched in fabricated melodrama that it belonged on a daytime soap opera. He dramatically pointed a well-manicured finger in my direction, casting me as the ultimate corporate monster. "Your Honor," he intoned, his voice echoing with rehearsed indignation. "What we have here is a chilling display of cruelty. The defendant sits on a mountain of wealth. She pulls in a massive six-figure salary, lives in a luxury penthouse, and yet she sits here today with a heart of ice, perfectly willing to let her own flesh and blood starve in the streets. She is completely abandoning her entirely helpless infant nephew while hoarding hundreds of thousands of dollars for herself." He let the words hang in the heavy air, allowing the fabricated tragedy to soak into the wood-paneled walls. As soon as he returned to his seat, it was my parents' turn to deliver their star performances. My mother practically dragged herself up to the wooden witness stand. She gripped the edge of the box, her knuckles white, and let loose a fresh cascade of agonizing tears. She looked the judge right in the eyes and swore under oath that I had come to them begging for forgiveness. Haley felt so incredibly guilty, my mother choked out, dabbing her face. She knew she was wrong for abandoning Marcus all those years ago. She knew she broke his heart. When Chloe and Marcus finally found happiness together, Haley promised she would shoulder all their financial burdens to make amends. She explicitly gave us her word that she would pay off their debts so they could give the baby a beautiful life. We all heard her say it. My father followed her, immediately taking the oath and nodding solemnly. He leaned into the microphone and painted a picture of a remorseful daughter who had simply changed her mind out of sheer spite. She offered the financial guarantee completely of her own free will, my father stated firmly, his voice thick with fake disappointment. We believed her. We thought she was finally acting like a real part of this family. But the minute the baby was born and the bills came due, she turned her back on us. She is trying to ruin them, Your Honor. She is trying to punish her sister out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. The presiding judge leaned back in his high leather chair, letting out a long, heavy sigh. He had heard enough. His mind was clearly made up. He looked down at me from his elevated bench, and the prejudice radiating from his eyes was palpable. To him, I was exactly what they described: a bitter, wealthy, jilted ex-wife who was using her corporate bank account to aggressively punish her struggling, beautiful sister and her newborn child. "Miss James," the judge said, his tone flat and utterly devoid of sympathy. "The plaintiffs have presented sworn witness testimony, a signed guarantor contract, and an audio confession clearly outlining your agreement to assume financial responsibility for this child. The evidence against you is substantial and, quite frankly, damning. Before I issue my final ruling and order you to immediately commence payment on these massive debts, do you have absolutely anything to say in your own defense? Are you going to continue to sit there and waste this court's time? Every single pair of eyes in the courtroom locked onto me. Chloe shifted in her chair, a smug, victorious smile playing on her lips. My mother sniffled loudly, playing the victim one last time. My father crossed his arms, waiting for my inevitable surrender. I stood up. I did not carry a single piece of paper. I did not bring a thick, disorganized binder full of printed emails or emotional diary entries. I simply picked up my heavily encrypted iPad Pro, which was encased in a matte black titanium shell. The absolute silence in the room was deafening as I calmly walked out from behind the defense table and approached the audiovisual cart positioned in the center of the floor. I did not look at my family. I did not look at their smug lawyer. I kept my eyes locked on the digital interface in front of me. I plugged the physical connector cord directly into my device. The massive projector screen hanging on the wall behind the judge flickered to life. I did not start with a defense. I started with a devastating offensive strike. Your Honor. I began, my voice ringing out clear, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. The plaintiffs are claiming they need hundreds of thousands of dollars to prevent a child from starving. Let us look at exactly where their money has actually been going. I tapped the screen. The entire courtroom gasped collectively. Projected in high definition was a massive, incredibly detailed data visualization chart. It was a forensic map of Chloe and Marcus's exact cash flow over the past 18 months, completely isolated and verified by banking ledger metadata. The chart was color-coded, mercilessly breaking down every single dollar they had spent. As you can see clearly highlighted in red, I stated, pointing a laser pointer at the largest section of the graph. Exactly $0 of the accumulated debt they are attempting to force upon me has been spent on pediatric care, baby formula, or child housing. Instead, we see a recurring monthly charge of $2,500 for a leased luxury sports utility vehicle. We see $45,000 spent at high-end European fashion boutiques in the span of 90 days. And right here, we see a recurring payment of $4,000 every single month to a digital public relations firm specifically hired to artificially inflate my sister's social media follower count. I watched from the corner of my eye as the color completely drained from Chloe's face. The smug, victorious smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Her slick lawyer suddenly shot up from his chair, his face flushed red sweat, instantly beading on his forehead. "Objection!" he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "Your Honor, this is unverified, highly prejudicial information. The defense cannot just throw up random charts without proper foundational context." The judge held up a hand, completely ignoring the lawyer. His tired eyes were wide open now, absolutely captivated by the undeniable clarity of the financial forensic map glowing on the screen. The narrative he had been fed had just violently collided with cold, hard mathematics, and the mathematics were winning. He leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses, his demeanor completely shifting from irritated to intensely curious. "Overruled," the judge snapped sharply, waving the panicked lawyer back into his seat. He turned his gaze back to me, the prejudice entirely gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a man who realized he had been lied to all morning. "Miss James, the court is extremely interested in this data. Please continue." I nodded once. The first layer of their digital firewall had just been breached, and I was about to execute the fatal system crash. I tapped the screen to load the next slide. I tapped the matte glass of my tablet, loading the next sequence. Your Honor, the plaintiffs submitted a digital audio recording as their primary, undeniable evidence of my supposed financial promise. A highly complex acoustic visualizer suddenly dominated the massive projector screen, displaying two entirely different, brightly colored sound wave patterns. The file they provided certainly sounds exactly like my voice, but human ears are incredibly fragile, easily manipulated instruments. Advanced acoustic forensic analysis software is not. I pressed a button on my screen to play the raw audio. The fake confession echoed through the silent courtroom. Then I triggered the diagnostic overlay. The visualizer immediately flashed violently with severe compression warnings, highlighting unnatural digital artifacts in bright red. What you are looking at is a synthetic generation commonly known as an artificial intelligence deepfake. My corporate security team reverse-engineered the foundational voice models and traced the audio samples directly back to 3 of my publicly available corporate keynote speeches recorded in 2019. They did not just lie under oath. They literally programmed a machine to lie to this court on their behalf. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the gallery. Even the court reporters stopped typing for a fraction of a second. I swiped to the next slide without waiting for them to catch their breath. Furthermore, I continued projecting a stark black terminal screen densely packed with lines of raw network routing data. Exhibit A, the supposedly legally binding guarantor contract. An electronic signature is not a simple drawing. It requires a cryptographic hash, a verified timestamp, and a specific Internet Protocol address to legally bind the signatory. The network packet capture logs unequivocally verify that the digital signature on this document did not originate from my highly secure corporate office network, nor did it come from my private penthouse router. I used my digital pointer to circle a specific string of numbers. The geographic routing coordinates perfectly match a specific residential broadband router. To be precise, it maps exactly to the local Wi-Fi network of the luxury rental mansion that my sister and my former husband were occupying at the exact moment the document was signed. They forged my digital authorization from the comfort of their own living room couch. I paused, turning my body just slightly so I could look directly at Chloe. Your Honor, we are no longer dealing with a frivolous family court dispute. This is verifiable, meticulously documented federal wire fraud. But the most tragic, fatal vulnerability in their entire scheme involves the very people sitting right behind them, I said, my voice dropping to a surgical, deadly calm. I brought up the final slide. It was the complete unredacted loan agreement from the commercial bank spanning 50 pages, but summarized perfectly on the final sheet. Because my sister and her husband had completely destroyed their personal credit scores with excessive luxury spending, the bank absolutely refused to issue this massive consolidation loan without substantial physical collateral. They demanded tangible assets to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars. I highlighted 2 specific, incredibly damning signatures at the very bottom of the projected document. My parents were so incredibly eager to enable my sister's fraudulent influencer lifestyle and so completely blinded by their absolute certainty that they could legally force me to pay the final bill, that they blindly signed on the dotted line. To secure the loan for Chloe, they legally pledged their entire retirement fund and the deed to their primary family home as the sole collateral. Pandemonium erupted. The entire courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. My mother let out a visceral, agonizing shriek that echoed off the high ceiling, sounding like a wounded animal. She collapsed entirely against the wooden bench, grabbing her chest as she struggled to breathe. My father turned a ghostly, sickening shade of white. His eyes bulged out of his head as he stared at his own signature magnified on the wall. He lunged forward over the wooden divider, screaming directly at Chloe, demanding at the top of his lungs to know if the document was real. Chloe was physically shaking, stuttering uncontrollably, entirely unable to form a single coherent word as tears ruined her carefully applied makeup. Her expensive lawyer was furiously packing his leather briefcase aggressively, shoving files inside, completely abandoning his clients in real time to save his own legal license. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus bolt. He pushed his chair back so violently it crashed to the floor and sprinted toward the heavy oak double doors. He barely made it 3 steps before 2 heavily armed courtroom security officers tackled him hard against the wooden paneling, pinning his arms tightly behind his back as he screamed obscenities. The judge struck his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block so violently I thought the handle might splinter into pieces. "Order!" he roared, his face purple with absolute unadulterated fury. I will have order in my courtroom immediately. The security guards forced Marcus back into a chair standing directly over him with their hands on their utility belts. The judge glared down at the plaintiff's table with pure, unfiltered disgust. "This case is dismissed with extreme prejudice," he barked, his voice laced with venom. "I am immediately voiding this entirely fraudulent civil claim. Furthermore, Miss James, I am personally signing an order right this exact second to transfer every single byte of your forensic data directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Attorney's Office. Your sister and her husband are not walking out of this building today. They are going directly into federal custody." The formal proceedings ended in total, absolute devastation. As the federal marshals entered the room with heavy metal handcuffs for Chloe and Marcus, my mother crawled across the aisle. She grabbed the hem of my tailored blazer, her face smeared with makeup and tears of genuine soul-crushing terror. "Haley, please," she wailed, her voice cracking painfully. "Please withdraw the data. Tell them it was a terrible mistake. They will take our house. They will take our entire retirement. Chloe will go to federal prison. You have to save us. You are family." I looked down at her trembling hands. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sorrow, no lingering familial attachment. The firewall was impenetrable. I calmly reached down and unplugged the connector cord from my encrypted device. The massive screen behind the judge went entirely black. I looked my mother dead in the eyes and delivered my final system update. "Data does not lie," I said coldly, my voice easily cutting through her hysterical sobbing. "And I am no longer the backup drive for this family." I turned on my heel and walked out of the courtroom, leaving them to drown completely in the exact toxic flood they had built for me. 1 exact year later. The legal system moves slowly, but federal prosecutors armed with irrefutable metadata absolutely do not lose. Marcus and Chloe were both convicted of multiple counts of felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. They are currently serving 5-year sentences in separate federal penitentiaries. My nephew, the child they so callously tried to use as a human financial shield, was placed with a thoroughly vetted, incredibly loving foster family entirely away from their toxic, narcissistic influence. My parents completely lost their desperate civil case against the commercial bank. Their house was foreclosed on, their retirement fund was entirely liquidated by the creditors, and they were forced to file for total bankruptcy. I heard through the corporate grapevine that they are currently living in a cheap one-room boarding house on the absolute industrial outskirts of the city. As for me, I stood on the massive glass balcony of my Seattle penthouse. The heavy rain had finally stopped, and the vibrant city lights reflected beautifully off the dark, calm water of the bay far below. I poured myself a generous glass of incredibly expensive red wine and took a slow, deep sip. Every single corrupted file had been permanently deleted. The network was entirely secure, and all the variables were perfectly balanced. My final data point was absolute peace. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.